Bill 2022 in this second reading. Chairman, I just spoke. Next one, Dr. Tik Chi Yun. Chairman, third side strongly opposes the government's reducing budget for the welfare sector by 1%. And we also object to the government targeting the vulnerable. 1% of welfare budget equals to $200 million. To the government expenditure, $200 million is tiny. But to welfare organization, it means 500 social workers. A reduction of 1% means 500 social workers will lose their jobs. All along, the government has been cool to the needs of the social welfare sector. It kept saying that everyone can share the burden of the current finances. But let me ask the government, why there's no reduction for budget for schools, for hospitals, except budget for homes for the elderly and handicapped? Is it fair? You may think that equal distribution of resources is what it's all about, but we are also talking about there's another concept of appropriate allocation of resources. The welfare sector serves the underprivileged. So why do you need to take away 1% from them? You say that it's fair, but indeed, you haven't really considered carefully how we can meet the needs of the underprivileged. In 1999, during the colonial era, government era, there was subsidy system reform. The proposal back then was, to ensure the wages for staff. The government actually withdrew its proposal because the proposal could not ensure the wages of staff. By 2000, Mrs. Carrie Lam, as the Director of Social Welfare, she did listen to the views of the sector, and then she launched a refined, fine-tuned lump sum grant system, under which there's a tied-over grant. The tied-over grant was proposed, the spirit of which is to ensure that the wages and benefits of staff would not be curtailed. The motivation was right. It was the right move. Therefore, organizations and staff accepted the lump sum grant proposal in the end. But has that really improved quality of our service? Unfortunately, the government actually, in 2000 and 2006, came up with some exercises to save costs, reducing 6.5% of our budget. And yet the reduction had never been discussed with us. It's an across-the-board reduction. So the lump sum grant actually ended up as a scheme to take away resources from us. And yet the government expected us to live up to our performance pledges. They are giving less resources to us, and yet we have to provide the same output. So I would say that the government had not kept its promise or an agreement with us. The reduction of 6.5% amounts to a reduction of $10 billion in welfare expenditure. The money could have benefited many, but because of the government's measure to reduce our budget, welfare services were undermined. So organizations have no longer any financial ability to maintain the same protection for staff wages. With the curtailed budgets, difficulties emerged in management, and organizations have to save costs, which is by reducing staff and wages. But as I said, we cannot reduce our services. We want to live up to our performance pledge, but has the government honored its commitment to giving us the support, financial support we need? Management was under huge pressure, and that really spoiled their relationship with their staff because there are disputes involving staff wages. Some organizations have been too conservative or have over-accumulated surplus, but that only makes them a small number of organizations. I think you can discuss with the sector later on how to make good use of resources available. Over the past 20 years, staff have been under a lot of pressure because they are not given reasonable wage and benefits. In the past, our salaries and remuneration were on the par with that of the Social Welfare Department, with the same starting salary and increment points. But nowadays, the starting point and salary increments in the sector are not the same, are lower than that of the SWD. And also, even the maximum point is lower than that in the public sector, maximum salary. And many of our staff now are on contract basis. Actually, that means that there's unstable staff turnover. Staff morale has been heavily hit. Turnover rate is so high. In the 2019 survey, the turnover rate in the social welfare sector is 20%, and even 3% of newly hired social workers would leave their jobs. So, Chairman, you can see that the lump sum grant system resulted in 3 losses. People have criticized why the government curtailed the welfare expenditure, why were staff's wages and benefits reduced, and also staff in the sector were treated unfairly, and therefore their morale is low, and many have left, and the stability of the labor force is heavily influenced. So organizations faced much difficulties in managing their staff. So we need to have a fundamental revamp of the system. In 2008, in 2018, the government carried out 2 reviews, but looking at the review reports, they only contain very minor suggestions. They didn't really touch on the core issues, which were that under the current funding mechanism, how we can ensure that the staff benefits and wages can be ensured. As Carrie Lam said when she was the Director of Social Welfare, she had the job to monitor the budget and also to provide a tie-over grant to ensure protection of staff wages. But the spirit was not observed. So now we have to think of how to revamp and optimize the system to stabilize the profession and also to ensure benefits for the staff. The fine-tuning exercises in the past have not addressed the core issue. Well, staff in the welfare sector have struggled for 20 years and the problems remain. How can we give our staff an appropriate, reasonable salary scheme and also recognition of their experience? After the government took away money from the sector, we're not asking for more, but we just want to be treated on the same basis as staff at the social welfare department. Under the pandemic, our staff, under curtailed funding, our staff have still been living up to our duties, and yet we have not received any words of comfort and support from the government, except the letter from the government lately saying that they need to reduce 1% from the sector. So the government is targeting the underprivileged. Again, Chairman, even though the budget has provided relief for the public, but the government's neglect of the needs of the underprivileged and its continued exercise or decision to deduct 1% of our budget, this is unacceptable. Our target recipients or service users do not support it either. I hope that in a couple of days, the government can give us a proactive and positive response. If we don't get a satisfactory response, Chairman, I would, in the second and third reading, abstain from voting on the budget, the bill. Thank you, Chairman.
Dr. Chow Mian Kong. Madam Deputy, since the 5th wave of the pandemic started, livelihood and business have suffered a hit. Along Nathan Road and in Causeway Bay, we see plenty of empty shops, which is sad to see. Hong Kong and our nation have been suffering from sanctions from the U.S., and we have seen fluctuations in our financial markets. Import prices have hiked, while the cost of living and pressure have risen. So Hong Kong has a lot of work to do in terms of rebuilding. The current term government has not done a proper job in reopening the borders and fighting COVID, and this had led to dismay from the business sector. As a whole, we say that the budget offered a lot of one-off measures and expenditure in fighting COVID. The fiscal deficit would reach some $50 billion, but the budget still look to support the people, including another round of $10,000 handout under the consumption voucher scheme. And tax deductions for renting domestic properties have been provided to relieve the burden on enterprises. And a rental enforcement moratorium has been provided. So we believe that the budget is a sensible one, and it can help reinstate faith in the markets. However, I stress that to truly revive Hong Kong's economy and boost employment, we must achieve dynamic zero infections, and this should not just be a slogan. We must create favorable conditions to reopen the borders with the mainland. That is how the external investors would return to Hong Kong. In terms of the industries and the trade, as a scholar in economic policies, I have been studying how we can exercise the strengths of one country, two systems to integrate ourselves into the national development plans and the dual circulation strategy. How can we build better links with the mainland to achieve synergy? As to how the SAR government can support the development of Hong Kong individuals and enterprises on the mainland, this is my specific interest. For individuals and enterprises on the mainland, the current term government has provided more support measures, and I have conveyed this message to the CDB, requesting a written reply. I also asked a supplementary question, but unfortunately, no solid answer has been offered. I just wanted to know some fundamental information, that is, the relevant expenditure and manpower provision on the support offered to individuals and enterprises on the mainland. And I was shocked that the relevant figures could not be provided by the CDB. The same would not be said of other bureaus. In that case, how can you convince LegCo that the government's support measures for those on the mainland have been effective? More than a dozen business organizations on the mainland have told me that in the next 3 years, $135 million would be earmarked for the to the TDC, but they do not see their roles, and they believe relying on the TDC alone is inadequate. That is why I urge the government to provide recurrent or project-based funding for Hong Kong businessmen or businesses on the mainland so that they could integrate themselves into the mainland development plans in terms of education. Hong Kong has seen an outflux or an exodus of talent. So talent is about retention, training, and attracting new blood. And in this regard, it is important to reinstate the faith of the public and foreign businesses. According to Census and Statistics Department, in the past 2.5 years, Hong Kong's net outflux of population is about 117.4 thousand. I think another figure would highlight this issue. That is, the MPF authority provided statistics on those who withdraw MPF on the grounds of permanently leaving Hong Kong. In the past 3 years, the number of applications went up by more than 10% every year, and the total number of applications in the past year was about 100,000, and this is something the government cannot ignore. And our key competitors like Taiwan and Singapore have quoted these figures. They said that since the anti-extradition law incident in 2019, Hong Kong has recorded a net outflow of population, and the total was about 252,000. But I could not identify the source of such data. And a number of immigration or migration consultants said that the outflow is due to the instabilities in our society. I think such claims were much exaggerated. We could see how our main competitors like Singapore have attacked us on groundless claims, and the reasons were obvious. To tackle the provision of manpower in Hong Kong, we must start with education. Hong Kong's universities spend on average $20 billion of public funds every year. So for UGC-funded universities, how can we ensure that they make use of public funds properly? And we must integrate ourselves into the national development plans and dovetail with mainland economic development. 25 years after reunification, the UGC's composition have never changed, and a number of people in the education sector said the UGC has recently reviewed 7,000 RPG programs. A working group was set up. The convener and 3/4 of the members were scholars from the West, including retired academics, and only 2 were Chinese. These scholars have had resided for prolonged periods overseas. How can they come up with an accurate assessment on the developments in Hong Kong and our nation? The number of academic places would dictate Hong Kong's future, so why would we hand over our future to foreigners? Hong Kong is not like Shanghai in the 1990s. I think the current situation is just hard to justify. The Education Bureau and UGC must reform the current practice. They must make best use of public funds and to foster an education system that embraces one country, two systems. In light of overseas experience, I suggest the SAR government to reform the resources allocation mechanism by reviewing the composition of the UGC and appoint experts and academics as well as trade representatives to replace the majority of the members who are foreign academics. The new term of the government should conduct a review on the way forward for Hong Kong's education, and they must clarify the roles of self-financing postgraduate programs or university programs. And the UGC should not be composed of mostly foreign academics. The realization of R&D should be a priority. Hong Kong must foster a younger generation with a sense of belonging and responsibility to the country. And so I speak. Mr. Jeffrey Lam. Thank you. Madam Deputy, since the budget was delivered, well, it has been 2 months. The budget accepted the 50-odd proposals from the BPA, including a funding of $54 billion on anti-epidemic work, the $10,000 electronic consumption coupons, tax deductions for rental expenses, and support measures for SMEs. We welcome such moves. Given the current economic climate, the SAR government must listen to popular views, and they rolled out more than $170 billion worth of counter-cyclical measures, and this is not easy at all. The Financial Secretary, Mr. Paul Chan, has come up with a fine budget, and myself and the Hong Kong General Chamber of Commerce has addressed Hong Kong's imminent needs, such as epidemic control, providing alleviation for the public and enterprises, supporting the economy and planning for the future. In terms of supporting enterprises, the FS accepted our proposal of offering further alleviation for enterprises by offering reduction in profits tax, providing relief on water and electricity fees, etc. The government also adopted our proposal of extending the pre-approved principal payment holiday scheme to October this year and to increase the ceiling under the special 100% guarantee product scheme. And meanwhile, the export credit guarantee program provides a guarantee of up to 70%, which would improve the liquidity of enterprises. We are at a critical juncture in fighting COVID. Many enterprises have suffered issues with capitalization. These alleviation measures can help many businesses. However, the fifth wave has seriously affected many industries, and the problem faced by many companies were not new. The government should continue to extend the special 100% guarantee product and pre-approved principal payment holiday scheme and keep tabs on the market, and they should not withdraw or conclude these measures rashly. Since the fifth wave started, I have asked the government to come up with an enhanced version of the ESS by providing wage subsidy to more employees. The budget did not take on board this proposal, but nonetheless, they did assess Hong Kong's economic conditions, and at the end, they announced the third round of ESS amounting to $43 billion. The relevant scheme has been refined so that more employers, employees, and self-employed persons could benefit. Mr. Paul Chan has played an important role in these initiatives, so I'd like to thank him personally. I hope the government would extend the scheme further by 6 months if needed. They should remain open on this. We cannot see into the future, and we do not know when the pandemic will end. If we see a rebound, the government could then swiftly support enterprises, including SMEs. Madam Deputy, this year marks the 25th anniversary of the reunification. Early this year, the BPA proposed a $10,000 reunification consumption voucher for everyone to boost consumption sentiments and celebrate the occasion. The FS has adopted the proposal by announcing $10,000 worth of consumption vouchers across 2 phases, and most people have secured the first $5,000 allocation already. And the markets have been vibrant these days, which is great to see. The FS also talked about the need to reinforce Hong Kong's status as a financial hub. Despite the decrease in revenue and increase in expenditure by issuing different government bonds, they are conducive to healthy finances, and the government accepted our proposals by issuing different types of bonds, including green bonds. These measures can refine our financial markets and foster diverse development. Bonds offer another revenue of interest for investors. The entry requirements should be lowered, and the bonds should be securitized to allow investors to invest in bonds and funds through different platforms, and certain green bond allocations should be reserved for SMEs, securities brokerages, so that they could grasp such opportunities. Meanwhile, the GBA outline development plan talks about developing Hong Kong into a green financial center. As an international financial hub, Hong Kong should maximize its strengths in fostering green and sustainable finance development. The government should conduct more publicity efforts in the GBA and encourage more GBA enterprises to issue green bonds in Hong Kong so that Hong Kong can become a green bond hub in the GBA. The government should continue to encourage more GBA companies to use the capital markets of Hong Kong for financing and subscription, and this way we can support the GBA's bond products. As for the development of renminbi business, family, office, and fintech initiatives, these can reinforce Hong Kong's role as an international financial hub. We welcome investment from the government in INT, life sciences, and other emerging areas to benefit our economy on the long run. Madam Deputy, the BPA has been asking for early opening or the reopening of the borders as soon as possible. If the borders are not reopened, all these plans would be empty talk. The pandemic has further eased in recent days, and the inbound travel or the inbound travel quarantine measures have been relaxed. We did not see major outbreaks. The daily caseload has remained at 3 digits in recent days. So the SAR government should ask the central government to allow travelers who are vaccinated to travel across the border without quarantine. And this is how we can revive our economy and relieve the livelihood of the people. In the past weeks, the SAR government has done a very good job in this regard. The caseload went from from tens of thousands to about 300 cases yesterday. This is thanks to the efforts of the SAR government and the support from the public. Hopefully, in a few weeks, we will see even less cases. We hope we can revive Hong Kong's economy, and once again, we hope we can reopen the borders with the mainland as soon as possible. I call upon the SAR government and the next term government to restart discussions with the central government in this regard. Despite all the challenges faced by Hong Kong the past year, I'm happy to see that the FS has addressed the needs of the public and enterprises while planning for our long-term future and to create a solid foundation for our future. Once again, I urge the SAR government to discuss border reopening with the mainland authorities. Thank you.
Mr. Tan Kah-Pui, thank you, Madam Deputy. Well, we come back to this chamber once again. Now, we haven't got many colleagues here. Vis-a-vis when we had the virtual meetings, we could see a lot more faces on the screen. Now, for the delivery of the budget speech, I think I have this very strong message coming out from the budget, and I would like to praise the FS on a number of points. Now, it seems that we would have been struck with bad luck with natural disasters and the Black Cat fires, etc., for a number of years. Now, even though we could not resume normal travel, and we had the epidemic, we had expected a deficit budget. But still, for 2021, there was sufficient revenue so that the fiscal reserves made a gain and we had a surplus budget. It shows that for public officers, academic people, lawmakers, and the general population, we all share one view, that is, we have a bright economic prospect. Over the past 2 days, there was this sort of argument saying that perhaps we should withhold the impending abolition of the offsetting of MPF contributions against long service payment, etc. We would only be introducing it in 2025. If the economy is still booming, then there's no need to be so worried. Moreover, the government has come up with a subsidy scheme, having taken on board the views of the employers and employees. So I hope the government will stay firm and adhere to the schedule of abolishing the offsetting mechanism. I would then talk about the $10,000 electronic consumption vouchers. Everybody has sung praises. We have been advocating for it for a long time. It can stimulate consumption and employment. We had always assumed that there would be resumption of normal traveling. As soon as we are ready with electronic payment, I know that we have at least got 2 systems, Alipay and WeChat Pay. Even if I don't open a renminbi account, I can still rely on the 2 platforms to spend electronically on the mainland, and we can integrate into the lifestyle of the mainland. But of course, we have yet to see our borders being reopened. And then there is one point that I have to praise the government. That is, the landlords cannot force the tenants to pay up the rent. I think it is a very good policy. In the past, the government did nothing about the vested interest. Now, I think the government is intervening. Of course, we don't have to resort to this measure frequently, but at least I see this as a breakthrough. There's also one other social sort of reform. In terms of the rating system, the government is proposing that there would be a progressive system so that whenever we introduce a rate concession, the major landlords cannot benefit out of proportion. The landlord can only claim the concession for one property. And then when the rateable value is over $550,000, then we will be having a higher rate of rates. Well, you don't have to go far, but if you go to Causeway Bay, luxury homes are being subdivided into 5 homes. But then they won't tell you that they have subdivided the unit. You need to carry out investigation to know that they have been sort of saving a lot of taxes or saving a lot of rates. To judge the budget, we have to see whether money has been spent wisely. For 6 rounds of the AEF, we are talking about $200 billion. A lot of money has been spent, and yet the virus is still with us. Life is difficult for everybody. In particular, for the 5th wave of the epidemic, many of us would share this sentiment. I need to be frank with you. Not just the health system has collapsed. I have to say that the district system of the SAR government has also failed. I talk from my personal experience. I went on over 100 visits to households who are homebound because they have to be quarantined at home. They try to ring the HAD's number. It is a matter of good luck that you can get through. And then the HAD would tell you that it is the Social Welfare Department that is responsible for the home delivery. Now the SWD would tell you that, oh, I'm sorry, it's 6 p.m., it's time to knock off, and no delivery will be possible today. Oh dear, it's a matter of life and death. Just the other day, we were told that 140,000 civil servants took part in fighting the virus. I just wonder whether it's 140,000 attendances or really 140,000 civil servants. There was this case that a resident found it difficult to buy bleach. Now the HAD gave them a very good idea. They gave 2 telephone numbers to the resident. At that time, I had 4 assistants. There were 2 who were infected. I didn't mind delivering the bleach myself, but I had to protect myself. Now, 2,200 people of the HAD, 6,000 people working under the SWD, and then 160 plus NGOs spent $20 billion. There are also schools. There are the property management systems under the housing department. But then citizens who need help don't get any help. We were always told that 50,000 cases of infection are a scary number. But then perhaps we get 100, 200 more households in individual areas that need help because they are the newly infected households. Then why can't you just get the housing department or other department staff to reach out to such households, 100 or just 200 extra today? Now $300 per hand wrist is the cost that the Innovation and Technology Bureau told us, and they had to entrust it with a logistics company to deliver the wrist. It is indeed unsatisfactory. No one would like to see this happening, including the civil servants. Yes, we know the plight. Even our colleagues got infected. We all beg this question. How could we have been more effective and efficient, like in the case of the vaccination program? Now, for the Center for Health Protection, hospital authority, and then the health department and other departments can match the records, and then you can tell who haven't been vaccinated and yet living on their own. Now, why can't we have online registration for vaccination? It won't be that difficult. Now, for political parties, yes, we're doing a voluntary work. Do you expect us to be in possession of information that singleton elderly people are waiting to get vaccinated? Of course, we haven't got this. I think departments can put their heads together. They can identify which elderly people haven't been vaccinated. It's a matter of saving lives. I just wonder if the money has been wisely spent. So I spoke. Mr. Chen Xiu-Hong. Thank you, Madam Deputy. I speak in support of the Appropriation Bill 2022. Now, we are threatened by the 5th wave of the epidemic, and it is against such a background that the FS prepared the budget. It is not an easy task. Adequate resources have been set aside to fight the virus in this budget. At the same time, the FS would like to ease the burden of the SMEs and the general population, also keeping an eye on the long-term economic development. So the budget is people-oriented, spending where it is needed, taking care of the impending needs as well as the long-term goals. I think for this budget, in terms of fighting the virus, in terms of relieving the livelihood hardships, I think the government has been quite generous, like for residents age 18 or above, $10,000 as consumption vouchers, raise concessions, tax reductions for salary taxpayers, etc. I think it is good in stimulating the economy when it is sluggish. And then the FHB gets $22 billion so as to expand the testing capacity, getting the rapid test kits and spending more money on the hospital authority and getting more money for procuring more vaccines. All such efforts to have my support. We need to spend money wisely and timely. In February, March, when the epidemic was at its peak, many citizens couldn't even get medicines for their fever, and they were quite desperate. Our officers could not provide help in time, so many citizens could only get the supplies from the government when their test results changed from positive to negative. That's why it's been very disappointing. While we try to control the virus, we need to do more. In particular, the FHB will have to review the policy. We have to check whether the control measures are right. The fifth wave has already cost 9,000 lives. Now the epidemic is stabilizing. We cannot afford to be complacent. We have to be on our guard and prevent a rebound of the virus infection. Now, I want to talk about the budget from the angle of my own profession: housing, transport, infrastructure, etc. 32 proposals were made by me. The majority of them were taken on board by the FS. I'm glad about that, like development of I&T, environmental protection, transport and infrastructure. The secretary said that there will be streamlining of the control measures. The construction industry will be encouraged to deploy innovation technology and so as to expedite the housing construction process and making greater use of MIC. I think this is a response to the shortage of manpower. It is good. I welcome this, and I hope that all such initiatives will be implemented soon. For the Northern Metropolis Development Strategy, I think this is the most important strategy. For the Future Fund, $100 billion will be set aside so as to use the income to drive the development of the Northern Metropolis. I support the proposal. But then for the Northern Metropolis development strategy, it is going to spend over a long period of time, and the government has to be careful about the timetable and roadmap. We have got the broad concepts, but we don't know about the short-term, medium-term, or long-term measures. We need to follow the mainland's model. We need to have 5-year plans for the Northern Metropolis development. Advocating I&T and also having a smart city are also my concerns. We should develop a manpower and talent pool just to support the I&T sector. I'm glad to see that this has been given a favorable response. The government is going to spend $130 billion on the infrastructure for I&T. The budget will also continue to promote I&T by injecting more money. It's good. What is regrettable is that government has given us this impression. You inject a lot of money, different funds have been set up, different schemes have been established, but the citizens don't see any results. We don't know how the quality of our living is being improved as a result of that. We don't see examples of AI. What about big data? What about health codes? Such played an important role on the mainland. In Shenzhen, they had the health code as well as the electronic payment, so that when they bought a bus when they scan the QR code, then the bus driver could tell whether this passenger is safe to be allowed on board. We haven't got anything similar to that. Now, for our government, yes, there are many slogans to develop R&D, but citizens at the community level did not sort of see any living examples. We can't just be told about the international ranking of Hong Kong. We couldn't simply have other grand slogans. We need to have specific targets so that innovation and technology will become more visible in the various applications in our daily lives. Environmental protection is something that is close to my heart. Yes, the government has done a lot, but I'm afraid it is of a limited scale, like a levy on plastic bag and a municipal solid waste charge. I think the government should do more than just that. In terms of public education publicity, more should have been done, like having incentives, tax concessions, encouraging more enterprises to adopt green measures. There should be campaigns, there should be ESG focus across the board, not just among enterprises, but also among households, so that we can raise the awareness and everybody should know about the impact of carbon neutrality on our society. And then when there was this consultation exercise on the budget, I asked for the EV home charging infrastructure scheme to be expanded. Yes, my idea has been adopted, but what is disappointing is that the government would like to encourage the use of electric cars. But then for every 10 vehicles bought by the government, less than one was electric vehicles. How could you expect us to follow your example? How could you sort of achieve the target of phasing out the hybrid cars? I think the government should lead by example. There should be a timetable and take the lead to have early adoption of an electric fleet of vehicles. In particular, for commercial vehicles, you need to come up with standards so that we can have green transport and we can achieve the target of carbon neutrality. Madam Deputy, I'm always concerned about the welfare of the youth, in particular for the social events, and I think what the young people were sort of mobilized to do was really heartbreaking. I think we need to do more in terms of national education and national identity nurturing. There should be more learning and teaching materials to promote national education in school, and also education about national security, national anthems, national emblems, etc. I think this is something we can't afford to be late, and then we can have national security education in place. And then for this economic challenge that we are facing, I think the budget has come up with quite a good sort of report, but then there are geopolitical challenges, and the infection may rebound. Can we be sure that the budget can see us through this storm? I think it is a test for the wisdom of the current term government. So I spoke. Thank you.
Lai Tong Kok. Chairman, I speak in support of the Appropriation Bill 2022. This is the last budget released by current term government. Hong Kong, within 5 years, experienced the Sino-US trade war, the black-clad social unrest, and the pandemic. So we went through various difficulties. Economically, things were not ideal, and that's expected. Per capita GDP, in the past 5 years, for 2 years, it was actually on the decline, something that Hong Kong hasn't experienced since 2003. Our per capita GDP in 2018, 800,000, fell to 350,000 years later. Last year, however, it rebounded. However, besides the economy, what's worth paying attention to is our fiscal reserves dropped in the last 5 years at quite a large percentage. In 2017-2018, Hong Kong's fiscal reserves were more than $120 billion. When the latest budget, Financial Secretary announced that the fiscal reserves by the end of 2022 will only have $960 billion left. So $200 billion have vanished from our fiscal reserves in the past 2 years. And in terms of Hong Kong government's expenditure, we are having reserves for 28 months to 60 months in terms of reserves available. We know that we need to spend a lot of money on fighting the pandemic. We understand that we need to spend where there is the need. The latest budget was actually released when the pandemic was at its peak. I think the Financial Secretary has given us a budget that actually passed the mark or the grade. It mentions the need to allocate resources to the hospital authority, healthcare, and also departments involved in fighting the pandemic. That's the right direction. We need to cope with the pandemic well, which is in line with the country's concept of putting people's lives first, and it's also hugely beneficial to Hong Kong's long-term economy. As I said a few days ago, when the outbreak occurred early this year, Hong Kong and the mainland had a good basis for reopening the border. As long as we join hands together and to fight together the pandemic, the last mile in the fifth wave, and also learn lessons from the various months and to be prepared for the future outbreaks, if any, I'm sure that reopening the border with China should not be too difficult. Hong Kong's economic recovery can be anticipated. And also, on fighting the pandemic, how about resources and use of resources? At the start of the pandemic, for more than 2 years in the past, the Hong Kong government used more than $460 billion in fighting the pandemic, including 6 rounds of anti-epidemic fund and also the distribution of consumption vouchers, all sorts of counter-cyclical measures to help those affected by the pandemic. Even if we have the resources available, appropriate arrangement needs to be made to make sure that those in need are really getting the help they need. My understanding is that most resources were spent not precisely. And there are also many examples of inappropriate arrangements. The launch last year of free RAT kits for the elderly, the intention was good, but the government limited those eligible to people using services at government centers. So those elderly in the grassroots who are at highest risk cannot benefit from the RAT kits. And also, it also happened that some elderly were turned away at the centers where the kits are distributed. So people were very dissatisfied. Money was spent, and yet we didn't get the result we wanted to have. And there's also public dissatisfaction. So you only see the trees, but not the forests. We have seen so many examples of that in the past few years. Once I discovered what happened, on behalf of the People's Party, the New People's Party, I wrote to the Secretary for Health, Sophia Chen, asking her to distribute to all elderly people the RAT kits. The Secretary and her bureau replied to me in the afternoon saying that they would ratify the measure, giving the RAT kits to all elderly people above the age of 60 at designated locations. And then any fees will be waived, and also unnecessary restrictions will be abolished. Chairman, I'm telling you this example to remind the government to make proper arrangements for use of resources. I also like to point out that LegCo members are the bridge of communication between the public and the government. We would always provide most timely and relevant opinions to the government. I hope that the government can listen to LegCo members more and also people who work in various districts and to consolidate the new system we have in place. Now I'm talking about fighting the pandemic with technology. The Financial Secretary in his speech pointed out that the current term government in INT has allocated more than $130 billion. To Hong Kong, of course, this is good investment. But in highlighting our heavy expenditure in INT, don't forget that technology is to facilitate development, social development. If there's no real value applications, then we are putting the cart before the horse. The SL government in the past 2 years and more, one area that has been much criticized is inadequate application of technology. In my early debate in LegCo this year, I made various proposals, the most important of which is to strengthen Leave Home Safe app and use various e-means to have effective tracing of close contacts and cut off the transmission chains. My motion was supported by colleagues and was passed with many votes, majority votes. And later on, when the Privacy Commissioner attended a panel meeting at LegCo, the Commissioner was asked, I asked her about the privacy protection for Leave Home Safe app, and the Commissioner clearly gave me an answer. For the pandemic and public health, the Leave Home Safe app then was added with a tracing function, and she said that didn't violate the ordinance on privacy, personal privacy. The fifth way gave us much valuable lessons. Even though our daily infection figures have dropped to 3 digits, the society is slowly returning to normal. But we must not forget, within 1 to 2 months, the tragic situation in Hong Kong. I hope that the government can, as soon as possible, add to the Leave Home Safe app the tracing function and make good use of data, big data, to prepare for the possible new wave coming our way. And during the pandemic, tourism was one sector heavily hit. I'm pleased to see that the Financial Secretary has acted to promote tourism, proposing allocation of $1.2 billion to help the industry. I and my colleagues in the MPP support it, but in the average of $200 million allocation of funding to promote local heritage, I do have reservation. I think the same amount should be allocated to the cruise journeys to the open sea. And also we should, for the suspension mechanism for cruise trips, we should lay down clear guidelines, criteria for suspending cruise journeys so as to attract more cruise companies to return back to Hong Kong. I agree that, for example, for the Future Fund to reserve $100 billion for the northern Metropolis region. I support that because that can help Hong Kong people integrate into the National Development Plan. And that should be a key mission for the Hong Kong government. Hong Kong is trapped in between complicated geopolitics. In order to become an international window and hub between China and the international community, it's not an easy thing to do. Thank you. Next one, Benson Look. Chairman, I'd like to thank the Financial Secretary for his budget, which has accepted more than 50 proposals from BPA, HK, including allocating $50.4 billion to fight the pandemic and the distribution of $10,000 in e-consumption voucher, and also a series of measures in support of young people and SMEs. In the past 2 months, during the peak of the pandemic, was witnessed, but luckily the infection rate has come down, but we still need to be vigilant to avoid a rebound. In paragraph 23 to 27 of the budget, the government allocated huge resources to fight the pandemic in the 6th round of anti-epidemic fund, or the building of temporary hospitals, procuring more vaccines, and also RIT kits. We also need to thank the central government for their support and supplies for Hong Kong. With the useful and speedy supply of supplies and support from the government, Hong Kong could climb out of the pandemic quickly. I hope that the government can be more vigilant and be aware of possible negative scenarios and should have adequate fiscal reserves to cope with the possible emergence of the nth wave of outbreak and also to prepare for future economic recovery. Chairman, I've been working among youth for more than 20 years. Paragraph 43 of the budget says that it accurately points out the main challenge facing young people. For example, they cannot use their talents. The new generation are making less money a month than people with the same education decades ago. Young people, if they are strong, then the nation will become strong. Same for Hong Kong. I think to foster Hong Kong and national development, we need to support the young people to help them stand on their own. In the budget, the Financial Secretary remembers the needs of young people. In paragraph 32, it mentions the Quality Education Fund with a reservation of $2 billion to help schools beef up their hi-fi equipment and also procurement of tools for e-learning, and also to minimize the digital gap. And paragraph 28, $149 billion was spent to pay the exam fees for HKTSE candidates. Paragraph 148 points out that the Continuing Education Fund support will be adjusted upwards to $25,000 to encourage lifelong learning, and these would win the support of young people. But if we, as mentioned in paragraph 43, to let young people exercise their talents and potential, then what goal should we set? We should let young people reap the benefits from our policies. They should be able to see their future and have access to tangible rewards. We must think a lot on what policies we should introduce. Firstly, we need to ease the challenge of young people being trapped in poverty. For example, young people repaying their debts while studying. Well, the election platform of the chief executive 5 years ago mentioned this issue. Now, for a student living in public housing, after he graduates from university, he would have incurred a debt of more than $10,000 from student loans. To a fresh grad, well, it would be difficult for them to repay the loan. And this could also undermine their incentive to further their studies. So I have proposed to the government several times whether we can, in terms of repayment of the student loan, can we adjust the loan repayment based on the monthly salaries earned by the graduates so that the young people can set more realistic midterm goals. We all want to make money with our own efforts, and we want to plan for our future with our limited resources and go and aspire for upward mobility, right? Another issue facing young people is that of housing. It's not a problem unique to young people, but it is the core facing young people's problem. 10 years ago, the government promoted the youth hostel scheme, giving young people the hope that they can move into their own flat. But 10 years have passed. Do you know how many hostel places now are being occupied? 80. Much less than what is demanded out there by young people. Some young people have become older already, and the objective of youth hostel is only to provide short-term accommodation needs of young people. The residents will be kicked out 5 years later. So it's not really a long-term solution to the housing problem facing the youth. So besides increasing the number of hostel places, the government can incorporate hostel as part of the public housing supply here. If we can provide also, thirdly, more decent posts for young people, a market with 75 million people should be a much better option. Therefore, Greater Bay Area must be the hinterland for the young people. China has developed a lot of new industries and, for example, esports, KOLs, internet writers, authors, and app developers. All these new jobs have emerged. And there are also lots of slashers, many of whom are young people. It is a new normal for young people. So we need to encourage Hong Kong young people to jump to the Greater Bay Area with a population of 75 million, or even the 1.4 billion market in China, instead of limiting themselves to Hong Kong's 7.5 million market. Young people should jump on the bandwagon of newly emerged industries. There's also a mention of digital economy in the budget. Digital economy has developed fast, and it led to all kinds of technology like metaverse, blockchains, the Internet of Things, and so forth. Officials, have you noticed that recently online, quite a number of people have changed their profiles into NFT? Some KOLs have also joined the NFT market. There has been a lot in the news about it. NFT, non-fungus token, non-tangible token. NFT actually shows that the person owns the right to the image, and the image concerned cannot be changed under this non-fungible token development. So to change Hong Kong into an international I&T hub and also center for East-West cultural exchanges, we can think how we can further promote our digital economy, broaden it. NFT, art tech, and traditional art could be integrated or be integrated organically. So we need to think about how we can nurture talents in the field and really be in the forefront of promoting a healthy development of digital economy. The rise of NFT creates more opportunities and potential for art tech. For young people in particular, should they have a mobile phone, smartphone, they can easily access art tech online. And it also breaks down barriers, geographical barriers, and also lead to the integration of new and old cultures. The integration of art tech and NFT is part of the new digital economy, and it's also in line with the nation's 40th five-year plan. Its goal to turn Hong Kong into a center for innovation and technology and a center for East-West cultures exchanges. And we also need to let young people understand more all the chances offered by digital economy. So I would propose that we must enrich our teacher training in relation to sectors under the digital economy and career planning. And also we need to review our STEM curriculum, how we can nurture more young people who are better versed in digital economy. We need to promote the 40th five-year plan development of chances provided to young people. Digital economy will be the future of the development of our youth. I hope that the government can make good use of the Digital Economy Development Committee to explore more about the possibilities available. On the whole, I think that the budget has responded to the needs of livelihood needs and the economic needs of Hong Kong, and also provides an answer for the future for young people in terms of developing their talents and potential. I hope that the new term government can help Hong Kong go back to normal as soon as possible, and the economy can revive, and young people can really reap benefits soon. Now, Chairman, I've just spoken in support of the Appropriation Bill 2022.
Mr. Ngan Man Yu. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Madam Deputy. Scrutinizing the budget is one of the key functions of the Legislative Council. As LegCo members, we are obliged to monitor the spending of public money. Since the fifth wave of the pandemic started, Hong Kong's labor and employment market have sounded a clear siren. Unemployment has fluctuated, while retail, tourism, accommodation and construction have seen high unemployment rates. Many people were forced to join a different industry. That means certain industries have lost experienced practitioners, which is much regrettable. But on the other hand, for those who manage to transition to another industry, they play a part in diversifying our industries, which is not bad to see. Occupational retraining is crucial to this process. The government has accepted the DAB's proposal by raising the ceiling of the continuing education fund from $20,000 to $25,000, and this would allow many people to upgrade their skills and become more competitive. I see that in the budget, the government's allocation in retraining has been somewhat redundant. Every year, the government has invested in the Employees Retraining Board as well as the CEF. But if we look more carefully at the list, we can see that many programs or courses are redundant. For the CEF-funded programs, they are offered to people of all backgrounds, regardless of their qualifications. And that is why many providers would offer identical courses. For the ERB, they offer many courses for security personnel, and when many other schools are offering the same courses, the situation is certainly not ideal. In terms of reindustrialization and promotion of INT, this explains the need for Hong Kong to diversify its industries. However, the relevant organizations or bodies are only working alone without any coordination under the Labor Department, Education Bureau, CEF, etc. I think between these bodies or programs, there should be better coordination, and they should better analyze the market as well as the needs of employees, and that would facilitate a better division of labor between different departments in order to come up with holistic long-term manpower planning to satisfy the needs of the labor market and employees. By rationalizing the division of labor, we can put the resources into better use. That way, we are able to implement a holistic retraining policy in order to enrich our labor market for the benefit of our industries. Since the government has finite resources, I expect the SAR government to accurately deploy these resources to achieve maximum benefits. Since the fifth wave started, some experts suggested that we might face a sixth wave of the outbreak. And in this regard, I wonder whether the government would provide more resources to the unemployed, especially those from poor households or single parent families. Hong Kong's unemployment rate has risen to 5%. For the temporary unemployment relief, the government expected 300,000 people to apply. At the end, there were 460,000. These show that Hong Kong faces serious unemployment. The DAB just completed a survey which showed that 40% of the respondents had been unemployed for a year. In other words, they have been unemployed since the fourth wave of the pandemic started, but they were unable to apply for TUR. So how can the government help these unemployed people? These are people who needed the most help from the government, yet they are not eligible for the alleviation measures. since the pandemic started, different parties and people from the community have called for unemployment relief for the unemployed to provide immediate relief. So once again, I urge the SAR government to consider the DAB's unemployment proposal by setting up a 6-month unemployment relief, and $6,000 should be offered every month for the underemployed and those from single-parent families. And in June 2021, the government relaxed the working hours requirement under the Working Family Allowance Scheme for Kowloon East. Many single-parent families told us that their children have to take Zoom classes under COVID, and as such, they could not find work, and childcare facilities in the community are lacking as well. So the lowering of the working hours requirement could benefit these households. The DAB proposed extending the relaxation measure by a year, but we are yet to receive a response, which is disappointing. As for labor welfare, the government would often say that any measures could be subject to abuse, but the fact is that many people in Hong Kong want to be self-reliant. But given the global COVID-19 pandemic, there was very little they could do. They hope the government could give them a hand. So once again, I urge the SAR government to take on board the DAB's proposal by extending the relaxation by a year. And the DAB has also paid attention to the middle class. Like many families, they face a lot of challenges, such as long working hours. And for families with 2 working parents, they could not take care of their kids and they must hire domestic helpers. And the pandemic has hampered flights between Hong Kong and different places, and there are quarantine arrangements in place, and the wages of the foreign domestic helpers have gone up. The government should reconsider a tax allowance for families that hire a foreign domestic helper. Mr. Edward Leung. Madam Deputy, while preparing my speech, I attempted to look at the budget from the perspective of the public rather than as a legislator, because through the lens of the people, we can truly assess the effectiveness of this budget. I had a chat with some residents. They told us that back then it was easier to seek medical support in Hong Kong, and it was also easier to purchase properties for university graduates. Well, over the past 10 years or so, their starting salaries have not improved. So apparently, Hong Kong was better then. But why don't we see a bright future for Hong Kong? Technologies have advanced, and we now have the internet. We should be living happier lives. But why are some people feeling the exact opposite? I think the reason is that our society has not offered hope for the people. Some people even thought they have been deprived of hope by the society. And why is that the case? The public has voiced their concerns over many long-standing issues, but hey, they have been ignored by the government. So at the beginning, it was just a minor discomfort, and gradually it developed into an illness. So I like to assess the budget from the perspective of the public and whether it can give people hope. I like to thank the Financial Secretary for offering tax concessions on people paying rent. It was a proposal presented by the DAB a long time ago, but the government has dismissed our proposal back then, saying that it was not feasible. And it shows that if the government wanted to get it done, it could be done. With the improved electoral system, the government should inject new hope in people's lives. So for the tax concession offered by the government, it can alleviate the burden on those who are paying rent. And this is one example in which barriers could be overcome. Again, it shows that the government can get things done so long as they have a will. In the last budget, the financial secretary was staunchly against an unemployment relief, but in the 6th round of the anti-epidemic fund, this measure was introduced. The FS might have gone through a major struggle in achieving this breakthrough, so I commend his effort. However, this budget is certainly not perfect. We have asked for tax concession for families who hire a foreign domestic helper. The fact is that many grassroots families had to hire a domestic helper, not just the middle class. For those grassroots families, if there's only one breadwinner, their income is often inadequate. So if they could employ a domestic helper to take care of their families, then both members of the household could work and make a living. So the foreign domestic helpers could help release labor productivity. So long as the government or FS are willing, I would be more than happy to join hands with you and listen to the views of the people. The budget lacked long-term planning on national education, and this is disappointing. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the unification, but over the past 25 years, what has the SAR government done? So what have you, or what results have you presented to the entire nation? We lack a holistic plan on national education, and whether our people are patriotic has much to do with our efforts. And as a spokesperson for healthcare affairs of the DAB, I'd like to comment on the healthcare policies.
Now, during the 5th wave of the epidemic, we see there are inadequacies in the healthcare systems. There's plenty of room for improvement. I see two particular deficiencies. First of all, inadequate healthcare manpower. And also the second question is the issue is a serious imbalance between the private and public healthcare sectors. Now, we want to address the manpower issue. We need to step up training. That's why we need to plan the third university teaching hospitals as soon as possible. We only have 2 now. So what do we want to achieve before 2036? That is, for every 1,000 population, we want to have 3 doctors. Right now, we only have 2 doctors per 1,000 population. But then the international standard, in advanced economies, the standard in advanced economies is 3 doctors per 1,000 population. So we want to achieve that by 2036. And then also we see a serious imbalance between the private and public healthcare sectors. So the government needs to use more resources to buy hospital services in the private sector for public hospital patients, and then we could relieve the pressure on the public healthcare system. And then people will have sufficient and timely health care, and minor illnesses won't become serious illnesses. And also, we need to promote more public-private healthcare collaboration. We don't need to wait for the next epidemic to do that. I hope the government will put the people first and address their pressing needs. And then we must put lives first over everything. And lastly, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Financial Secretary. In this last budget of the current term of the government, he has proposed some new thinking. I hope the new term of the government will also inherit that. So maybe this budget is not perfect, but we certainly acknowledge the efforts made by the government. So I will vote for the bill. I hope the government will not let us down. Thank you. Mr. Rock Chen. During the fifth wave of the epidemic for the budget 2020-23, it's offered timely relief measures for the businesses and various sectors as well as the general public who've been hard hit. And then we have the AEF 5.0 and 6.0. We also have the new round of employment support scheme. Definitely that's helped to offer some urgent relief to those sectors involved. So, and then there are also measures to help relieve the pressure on the public. It's because the government has listened to the views of the public as well as members of the 90 members of this council. The government is therefore listening to public views, and I fully endorse and I'm grateful to the government's doing that. Now, the Financial Secretary said that since the epidemic broke out 2.5 years ago, the government has spent over $600 billion. It is a huge amount that accounts for 20% of our local GDP. But then we fully appreciate that if we want to prevent local infection and importation of cases, and if we don't do a good job there, there's no way we could see our economy returning to normal. And then how many more $600 billion does the government have at its disposal? That's why the government must learn from this fifth wave, the experience of the fifth wave of the epidemic. That is, it has to reconsider the management, tracking, isolation, and quarantine arrangement. There has to be a systematic review, and we don't know whether there will be a sixth wave or seventh wave of outbreak, but if every time there's a wave of epidemic, what the government does is just to either tighten the measures or relax the measures, and so it's been the vicious circle. It will only bring Hong Kong down, and then we can no longer claim ourselves to be an international financial center or whatever. So there has to be an effective strategy to prevent and control epidemics. And only then we could maintain our status as international financial center, shipping center, and so on. And also, under the 14th five-year plan, the country has positioned us to become an international aviation hub and an international innovation and technology center. So we have to have the condition for that to happen. Now, I want to speak about Hong Kong, developing into an international financial center. There are 9 financial measures in the budget. These are all good measures that will certainly help the development of the financial sector in Hong Kong. I think, first of all, the government has to step up its international planning. And then we also need to be more involved in the financial market in the country. In the near to medium term, we need to offer more digital products as well as expand the various connect schemes and also provide a diversity of products. And also, I'm glad to see the government is further promoting the retail bonds. And this year, there will be more silver bonds and also I-bonds. And also, the government is has just launched the retail green bonds, and that's good, overwhelming response. So that will help to promote the diversity of such products. And also, it will promote the development of the bond market to target it for the general public. And also, by 2050 and 2060, the country is and Hong Kong are to achieve carbon neutrality. So we should step up, deepen our cooperation with the Greater Bay Area, and then we could bring more projects to come to Hong Kong for green accreditation. And then we have to seize upon the opportunities presented by the GBA and the Belt and Road initiatives because there will be green opportunities of green bond. I think Hong Kong will become more appealing to green bond issuers. Maybe we could bring more mainland municipal governments and businesses come to Hong Kong to issue RMB green bonds. On promoting green finance, we should step up, improve standards on disclosure, so Hong Kong could become the bridge between the mainland and the international markets. And also that we should inject $10 billion into the Voucher fund, $5 billion on fintech fund, and another $5 billion on the GBA investment fund. So we have to see how we could further promote productivity and competitiveness of Hong Kong. And then we have to consider more cooperation with the GBA. The Future Fund could also use ESG as a major investment direction so that we could invest in clean energy, renewable energy, and the carbon trading market. Now, we, of course, want a bright future for the financial sector in Hong Kong. At the same time, we need to manage financial risk properly. Now, we are seeing increasing tensions in the international arena, and then there is inflation around the world. The Federal Reserve Board has already said it will be increasing interest rates. So it's possible that capital will flow out of the Hong Kong market. We need to have proper risk management and sandbox arrangements. This is an important task. This will make sure that our financial market would not suffer systemic risk. Hong Kong is backed by the country. This is a unique advantage. Other international financial centers don't have this advantage. So we should make the most of the 14th five-year plan and the GBA development. And then we should further promote various connect schemes, the internationalization of RMB. We should have more collaboration on green finance. And then we should also enhance our functions as an international asset management center and risk management center. Then we could make new contribution to the overall national development. For micro and SMEs, I welcome the consumption voucher and also improvements to the 100% special guarantee scheme as well as the SME finance guarantee scheme and so on. Because this will help SMEs to tide over this tough time. Otherwise, the unemployment won't be as low as won't be just 5%. Of course, the government cannot replace the market. We could not be offering relief measures on a long-term basis. The best way to promote the economic development is to make sure that SMEs have the condition to do business, and then that's why the government is now relaxing social distancing measures that would certainly help SMEs to focus on the local consumption market. This will offer them some breathing space. But then just focusing on the local consumption market is not enough. We want to see full economic recovery. Resumption of normal cross-boundary travel is important. We also need to be connected with the international world so that we can bring capital and talents to come to Hong Kong. And that will then help to promote a full recovery of our economy. Now, on how we could resume cross-boundary travel as well as international travel, well, it's a matter of making the right choice, and that's an important and urgent issue for the next government. I support the Appropriation Bill 2022. I support the second reading, so I speak. Thank you.
Mr. Tang Fei. Mr. President, first of all, I'm speaking in support of this year's budget. This budget is rich in content, covering a wide scope of policy areas. I represent the education sector, so of course I'm concerned about education. We need to make a long-term effort to promote education. After 3 years of the epidemic, classes have on and off been suspended. But after all, it's a 100-year business as far as education is concerned. I'm happy to see that the total expenditure on education in 2022 and 23 amounts to $111.9 billion, up by $4.7 billion comparing to last year's estimate. The yearly increase is 5%, still accounting for 18% of total government expenditure. We used to top the chart. Now it's just behind health and social welfare. Still, I understand that the government is very generous in spending on education. At the moment, because of the aging population and people emigrating overseas and other reasons such as not being able to have quarantine-free travel with the mainland, number of students in Hong Kong have been on a decline, and the risk of cutting down classes ever more greater, affecting both secondary and primary schools. So at the moment, there is a negative perception when it comes to Hong Kong education sector. We no longer talk about Black Clad riot in Hong Kong. We talked about reduction of classes and reduction in class size in Hong Kong. The dilemma is when the student size decreases, the expenditure on education continues to increase. That is a contradiction. I'm not saying this is against the fiscal principle, but it is, after all, a contradiction. Also, we are getting more and more demanding when it comes to education and its content, be it national moral education, education on national security law, and STEM education, vocational and professional education training, etc. We are holding ever higher expectations on them. So I appreciate the government's continuous commitment and increasing commitment on education spending. At the same time, the government should think out of the box. The usual way out for the government is to increase expenditure on education whenever something goes wrong. So it's like gag money for the educators. I'm not saying that resources are not important. I'm just saying that the government should act with precision and consider education resources and what they can generate. For example, after deploying huge resources on national and moral civic education, are we achieving any result? KPIs should be set to gauge the effectiveness. Also, STEM education is a cornerstone to grooming tech talents in Hong Kong. Do we have professional STEM education so that we can catch up with the global trend of grooming tech talents? As far as vocational education is concerned, after education reform has taken place in Hong Kong, we seem to have a variety of courses, but that is not the case. We don't have pathways for that for the graduates. We need to give flexible and multiple pathways for school leavers, and the education should serve the economic needs of Hong Kong. So it's not just about education spending. We need to have a proper value for money audit for the sector so that we take the same approach to assess the effectiveness of different disciplines of education. As the classic Chinese saying goes, at the end of the day, whether our education can reshape or rebuild this branding in Hong Kong, it's not just about the stopgap measures. In order to have long-term prosperity and stability in Hong Kong under one country, two systems, we need to rebuild the brand of education in Hong Kong. We need to do away with the mindset of cutting classes and reducing student class size in face of a drop in the number of students. We need to retain local students and attract foreign students to come here so that we can groom talents for Hong Kong as well as for our motherland. This morning, some members expressed that in midst of the epidemic, our industries are still hit hard, and there is a concern that our economy will be going down the docks. However, if we have education, we shouldn't have to worry about economic recession. Next, Mr. Michael Look. Mr. President, I speak in support of the Appropriation Bill 2022. I will focus on public finance philosophy. The chief executive, when first assumed office, promoted the idea of a new fiscal policy so that a visionary approach will be taken to make good use of the reserve and invest for the long-term development of Hong Kong in order to resolve people's livelihood. I must say that there are improvements, but there is much more to be desired. The areas of improvements include the HKMA's investment strategy, and the surplus stand at some $200 billion with investment return over $37 billion. That's 20.3%, and some $50 billion will be plowed back to the reserves. As for the exchange fund, over $4.5 trillion have been recorded in its reserve. As for last year's investment return, $107.5 billion investment return recorded, some 3%. And the Hong Kong growth portfolio, the growth registered per year was 13.5%. Well, although this doesn't go directly into the public coffers, we still, however, understand we have a robust fiscal position where we are keeping ourselves afloat. And in terms of deficiencies of the public fiscal policy, I would say that in terms of livelihoods and other issues, we have been lagging so much behind, and we tend to be conservative in investing in the future. The reason behind is that we have a narrow base of government revenue, and it is not very, it's not a stable stream of revenue. And that is why, despite all good intentions, the government may find itself limited somewhat. Although under the Hong Kong growth portfolio, there will be an additional injection of $10 billion, and 50% will go to the Strategic I&T Fund, the other to GBA Investment Fund. This is a good deed, but we're talking about important issues like I&T and GBA, and altogether just $10 billion. It's far from sufficient. Also, for innovation technology, we need a lot of resources at the initial stage for startups, and $10 billion are simply not enough. We need to deploy more resources to support all worthy projects. For the Hong Kong growth portfolio, for the initial injection of $22 billion, the investment return rate, as well as the initiatives under these funds, are still unknown. According to the government, preparation is underway, but I am disappointed. So 22 billion plus 10 billion, altogether $32 billion. It's just 14% of the future fund. So all in all, I think there is still room to further expand the Hong Kong growth portfolio. The FTU agrees with the FS in the sense that the Hong Kong future growth portfolio should be set up to boost the long-term competitive edge in Hong Kong, and we hope that we can become the Temasek, and just like Singapore, the fund can be spent on investing directly into projects and projects related to the 14th five-year plan, and technology-related projects, arts and cultural items, and also other emerging industries. The government should take the lead in investing in these areas so as to boost the confidence of investors in the business sector. Being hit by the epidemic, the traditional industries in Hong Kong have been the hardest hit. For the tourism sector, in the past 2 years, there has been a standstill, and I believe they will have a long way to go on the path of recovery. We need to create more jobs, and we need to bring more job opportunities and upward mobility for our young people. However, if the government doesn't put words into action, if the government remains conservative, we'll be lagging behind, and we will not be able to catch up with the country's development. And we won't be able to solve the long-standing problem of so-called empty industries. And without new sources of revenue, at the end of the day, there will be structural deficit. Because of the epidemic, for the past 2 years, we have been having a deficit budget, and under the traditional free market principle, the first thing the government would consider would be to reduce expenditure and outsource public services or privatize public properties. The housing department back then divested properties and set up the link, and also outsourced public services. These are dire lessons for us to learn, because the underprivileged and SMEs have borne the brunt. The FTU is very clear as far as this is concerned. We object to these approaches. Instead, we believe we should tap new sources of revenue, and we propose tax reform. And we should tax the rich more by increasing 1% of the tax rate, and also impose tax on vacant first-hand properties. At the same time, apart from taxing the public, we should create a bigger market, and we should be better integrated into the Greater Bay Area, and take up a stronger role in the country's dual circulation strategy. These are measures that could create a win-win for all classes of the community. My suggestion is that on the premise of ensuring financial stability, the government should be more aggressive in its investment strategy. For the long-term growth portfolio with higher rate of investment return, it is 1/3 of the aggregated surplus, and this is just too little. The government should invest more. Second, for the $780 billion plus of surplus in the exchange fund, this is not for stabilizing the currency. Rather, this is the surplus carried over. So a mechanism should be set up so that the money can be plowed back into the public coffers as part of government revenue to be spent on livelihood-related items. Third, in terms of the Hong Kong Future Fund, as I mentioned, the Hong Kong growth portfolio can see its proportion of investment increase so that we can invest more on I&T. Arts tech is something close to my heart. It has to do with arts and cultural exchange and innovation technology and tourism. If we can brand ourselves on the basis of developing AR, VR, Metaverse, and NFTs, if we allow these to take place by enacting legislation in a timely manner, we will be able to boast our status as an international dispute resolution and arbitration center. Meanwhile, we can also attract more foreign investment. $100 million, however, have been reserved for the development of art tech, and only $36 million have been approved for 149 art groups. This is far from meeting the needs of the sector, and you're not unleashing the potential. Next point, and that's my final point, I agree with the Hong Kong long-term growth portfolio under the exchange fund. The IRR is 15%. Well, people have asked me whether I should just follow the exchange fund and the Hong Kong MA in its investment strategy. I believe that if the government gives a green light to the idea, it will allow members of the public and ordinary investors to get a better return as well, and we can return wealth to the people. The FTU suggests that the government spend more on redistributing wealth and sharing the wealth with the people by stepping up investment. We should grasp the opportunity of I&T in GBA, and that with the country's support, we'll be able to find a way out and solve deep-seated conflicts, and that people will be happy. I speak in support of the Appropriation Bill 2022. Thank you.
Mr. Lacroix. Thank you, President. For the past few months, fighting the epidemic have eclipsed the land supply debate. It become the government's top priority. The housing issue nevertheless actually became more acute and pressing. Let me take an example. The cramped environments of the subdivided units and the residential homes led to the rapid spread of the virus and led to the spike of new cases. The small space per capita turned home quarantine become a whole family's nightmare. The lack of land to build isolation facilities, but actually we are delaying the occupation of public housing units. While the Secretary is with us today, we need to convert some of the transitional housing and public housing units as quarantine facilities, which caused quite a few months delay for the residents. The housing problem is something the government cannot look the other way. And how much land is available to meet our demand? In this appropriation bill, according to the Secretary for Development, land supply and simplifying procedures, that will be the top priority after the Bureau receives the annual allocations. Therefore, I will focus my remarks on these two areas. First of all, I would like to thank the Bureau due to the effort in the past year and accepted the advice and suggestion for the park's remarks. For example, in the land premium for the residential sites to introduce a standard premium rate. And this March, the Bureau announced that the standard land premium to a requisite to resume land in new development areas. I believe that it would expedite land supply and accelerate the Northern Metropolis development. And I also welcome the amendment proposals to streamline development procedures. Over the past year, not just in the budget debate, on multiple occasions I request the Development Bureau to compress the statutory procedures to resolve the bottleneck. I'm glad that the Bureau finally launched the amendment proposals, which has taken on board of many of our suggestions. For example, on reducing redundant procedures and the time of drafting OZPs and what's the time to inspect the OZPs and allow the exec CE in council to partially approve the outline zoning map. If these amendments are passed by LegCo, I believe that there will be a positive impact to the Untitled Chapter vision and the Northern Metropolis vision. Well, if they can compress the development time to 2 years and 2.5 years, and I suppose that the benefits are more significant for larger scale projects. I hope that with multi-pronged approach, the 20 years time frame to develop land tomorrow will ready for occupation within 15 years. For Development Bureau, and now there's a 10-year long housing target with most of the units to be delivered at a later stage of the cycle. And the later half of this cycle, well, I suppose that it's been nice if we at least advance the completion for about a year, even though we require a lot of the departments to work together, there's still room for improvement. The amendment proposals mainly cover planning and land resumption statutory procedures. However, this is just part of the program, especially for large-scale NDA. For the advanced study and later the construction program, uses a lot of time. For example, the housing authority, they need to form the land and ready for construction. It now takes about 45 years. We'll all see that is it a bit too long that as soon as you obtain the land, you get able to build housing in 3 years. I saw plenty of examples that during the pandemic, with the central authority assistance, a lot of the community isolation facilities can be have the site formed and complete for occupation. It is something we can learn from. In the course of development, besides the statutory consultations, there are a lot of administrative procedures. For example, the Lands Department of modifying the land leases and negotiating land premium, as well as a simplifying department requirements on the division of labor and better coordination. So these is not the scope of the amendment proposals. I hope that the government can increase the scope of streamlining procedures from just the planning part to the advanced engineering study to the construction, that it could be streamlined from top to bottom in order to expedite land supply. Well, the long process of land resumption, and I would like to talk about how do we expedite land resumption. No matter how compressed in timetable that the government must resolve through policy. For example, how to offer fair compensation. Well, for the land resumption for housing, they come in different stages. For example, housing at NDA to offer a grade A compensation, there's about $1,300 per square foot. For other areas, for the land resumption for public housing, they only offer to grade B, which is about $800 per square foot. That's a $500 difference. Quite a huge difference. One example happened recently, and yesterday a development panel, it endorses the Yunlong NDA proposal. Thus, the land resumption offer is about $1,300 according to the grade A premium rate. And across the road, just exactly across the road, just 50 meters apart, there's another called Long Bin Public Housing Project. The land resumption offer, unfortunately, as it's not part of the NDA, it went early, that's only entitled to a grade B rate of about $800 per square foot. Well, in view of such unfairness, well, imagine the residents at Long Bin. Will they be happy to cooperate with the government? Well, to them, just a driveway apart and yet two different rates were offered. Is it fair to them? I hope that the government can offer a uniform land resumption offer to accelerate the process. The budget also mentioned that for Q4, there will be a preliminary proposal on the central waters that will financing through different modes. For example, bond issuance and public partnerships. The government must continue to reclaim land, which will afford the government more room to leverage in future land resumption exercise. Therefore, we must conduct it in parallel. And land resumption also costs us a lot of money, or as well as spending a lot on curbing the epidemic. If we adopt the old practice of the government being the solely financer while handling the land out tomorrow and the north of Metropolis, the public will be worried. Therefore, bond issuance and private partnerships are worth to take a look. Well, the financing come in different ways, or we can even consider land bonds. That we have something similar before, like letter A or letter B. The government can enhance the letter A or B to turn it into a new land bonds. And this land bonds can even combine with the land resumption new territories and land Tao tomorrow. well, the next term government should take a serious look. If the government is determined we can resolve the land shortage, I so submit. Next, Mr. Vincent Chang. Thank you, President. And today we are having a second reading debate on the Appropriation Bill. The Financial Secretary released the latest budget on 23rd of February. In the face of the COVID epidemic and high unemployment, this FS promised a series of relief measures and about $107 of counter-cyclical measures. As we all remember, it's about handing out $10,000 of consumption voucher. I see that the whole budget as being as steady and stable. Well, actually, on the WFA as well, the deductions for rental expenses, that will help a lot of people, and the unemployment is also a biggest problem. Underemployment rate, and while the unemployment is high, with 109,000 people unemployed, over the temporary unemployment relief received under 500,000 applications. It seems there's a long way towards economic recovery. Thus, I support this appropriation in the bill and hope that we can pass this bill as soon as possible to benefit the public. The government should closely monitor the unemployment situation and the recovery of various sectors. I would like to talk about a few things today. First, I would like to talk about housing. I've been very concerned about the housing in the past. The budget mentioned that there will be 330,000 units to be built. In my written question, I've asked the administration on the supply of public rental units and subsidized sales flats in the next 5 years. A lot of people have been waiting for like 7 years for public housing. 330,000, that by 2030, there's about 13 or 14,000 units, and in future only 1/3 will be delivered. As how do we streamline the land procedures? I hope that we can achieve this in the next term of government. Next, on subdivided units, SDU. Well, Secretary Frank Chen is with us today. This term government has done a lot. For example, provides transitional housing and rent control on SDU, as well as cash subsidy, helped a lot of SDU households to offer some short-term relief. However, we yet to resolve this SDU and housing crisis. For new term of government, I hope that the Secretary, well, in this year's budget, there's not much inkling. So whether we can offer further assistance to SDU household, and how do we say farewell to SDU, I expect there will be a timeline as a roadmap. And last year, we made a great step in terms of rent control on SDUs. The Secretary mentioned that after running it for some time, to see that we can regulate on the starting rent. And for the annual allowance to help the SDU household should able to progress. Note that the Secretary has been following on the transitional housing. I hope that whether we can boost the supply of transitional housing, later the makeshift facilities can be turned into the transitional housing. Second, I'm talking about arts, culture, and sports. In the budget, well, there's some new initiatives in arts and culture. The Secretary mentioned allocating 42 million on the Arts and Culture Expo, as well as promoting the use of art tech, and 85 million to develop the East Kowloon Cultural Center, and 70 million to upgrade the performing venues at LCSD, so that the performing arts group can deploy more technology. For example, the redevelopment of the Yamate Theater are all good initiatives. The arts and culture deserve a more or better hardware. For example, how do we align with the 14th Five-Year Plan to become a cultural center of the East and West? The expenditure on arts and culture has not been significant. And how do we provide the software with more government support? Besides hardware, we can also upgrade our software as well. And last week, I visited the M+ Museum. I noticed there was a large crowd, and people do enjoy such museums and so forth. Well, if we form the Sports and Arts Bureau, I hope there will be a news there. I hope that the members can support my members' motion in this regard. And speaking of sports, there's not much mention in this budget. When just talking about the Kai Tak Sports Park and the 20 billion upgrade of sports facilities. Well, we'll talk about venue sculpting is due to shortage. Looking ahead, in terms of sport policy, well, this year there will be the Asian Games and the National Games is approaching. And how do we provide a more quality space and train better athletes to thrive in the sports sector? Besides the Olympics, and recently for example, Chen Kalong became the first in the world, and Lang Wushen grabbed another medal. I see things is on the rise. In terms of the budget or the policy, more initiatives can be launched on sports. And next, I would like to talk about environmental protection. I support the government injected 1.5 billion to promote the installation of EV charging facilities in private buildings. This is very popular. Well, a lot of people are interested in switching to EVs. As I tell the secretary many times, besides their private cars, the public transport is another component in air quality. Recently, some bus companies have started introducing EV fleets. It seems that things are progressing. Hope that you can encourage more new energy buses so that more public transport operators can switch to the environmental green vehicles. Well, it's also meet the vision of a clean air blueprint and the roadmap for developing EV and to achieve the target of cutting carbon emissions. And last year, we have passed the municipal solid waste charging. I've asked the secretary many times at the panel meeting, and during the transition period, how can we implement the waste charging scheme? And how do we handle the designated plastic bags? I'm expecting the answer from very soon. And finally, I support this appropriation bill. Well, in Hong Kong, it's basically great challenges for the budget, and the new government can improve livelihood step by step.
Mr. Yim Kong. Thank you, President. Now, it's amidst the fifth wave of the pandemic that we see this budget when we are in a tough time. Now, the budget has offered various relief measures to the public and business sectors, and there are various good measures and policies. For example, for healthcare, there's additional funding, and then the counter-cyclical measures also cost some $17 billion. And then these measures would also help to promote recovery of the economy and our Hong Kong development. There is investment in infrastructure, innovation, technology, and also a livable environment. And also the budget has taken on board some of the proposals put forward by Chinese enterprises which I represent. For example, there are various support measures, to the Greater Bay Area development, and also regional collaboration on innovation technology. So this is on the whole a good budget. Then next is about implementation. There is still need to further review and improve the arrangement. I would like to make 4 suggestions. First of all, we have to make sure there is effective and efficient prevention control of the epidemic. Now, on healthcare spending, there's an increase of 30% this year compared to last year, and it accounts for over 20% of total government expenditure. So now, if we have substantially increased healthcare spending, then we must make sure that we see results so we could resume cross-boundary travel soon, and then Hong Kong could continue to develop as an international financial center. This is very important. that has to be the primary objective of the prevention control measures. So the government has to work on all fronts to move towards this goal. And also, we have a short supply of healthcare resources and manpower, so the government needs to make sure that investment plowed in is cost effective. First, we have to bring in help in a timely manner. For example, bringing in Chinese medicine support from the mainland. And also, we should provide a good foundation for Western and Chinese medicine integration and collaboration. We should also focus more on technology in helping with the prevention control of the epidemic. For example, we could use the big data, AI, and so on for analysis. We could do remote analysis, and then we could make the most of resources online. We should also actively listen to the views of different sectors, and then we could be more focused in offering relief measures to the sectors that are hard hit. Some have not been given help, so we need to have dynamic analysis, and then we could make sure that relief is offered in a timely manner and a targeted manner. And then the government also has to make long-term plans for reducing the number of poor people in Hong Kong. Now, we need to have various measures that will ensure there is a stable economic development. Now, if we promote spending, it will help in some ways to promote economic recovery. But then, in the long run, we will still not be able to come out of the economic doldrums. So the government needs to, speed up the development of the northern metropolis. That means infrastructure will go first, and then we could proceed with the various infrastructure projects. And so then we could use infrastructure development to promote the development of other related sectors. And then we also, for example, with land development and infrastructure investment, we need to streamline further the various approval processes. And then we need to shorten the time frame for such approval, and then we could create a favorable condition for promoting infrastructure development. And then in Hong Kong, there are certain sectors with a short supply of labor, so we should relax the requirements for importation of labor. Now, we need to seize upon opportunities provided by the national development. After the epidemic has ended, then we need to make all the plans so that we could then promote further integration with the mainland. And also, finally, the government must achieve savings and be careful with spending. Now, the government revenue would be a record high this year, $715.9 billion, but then spending is also a record high, $807.3 billion. Because we have this pandemic, there's war between Russia and Ukraine, and then there's inflation around the world and so on. And Hong Kong is one of the freest economies in the world. We are in a very challenging environment, so the government has to make more accurate assessment. It has to give more thoughts to risk management. So the government needs to make savings by streamlining its processes. And then it also needs to generate new revenue by enhancing the tax base. And so with the hard work of all involved, and we could see steady recovery of our economy this year. Thank you. I speak in support of the Appropriation Bill. Professor Nelson Lam. President, good health to everybody. Now, I was born in Hong Kong, and I'm a Chinese. Now, if we are, we need to be able to see the whole picture, and that's what the financial secretary is able to see. So he's in keeping with reality. Now, he has therefore put forward various fiscal measures and so on, and also relief measures to the public. Now, as at the end of March, we have a fiscal surplus of $29 billion, which is slightly higher than the original estimate of $18 billion. So if we have surplus, then the government could spend money or to offer relief to the public and support businesses. As the budget was delivered this year, we were in the midst of the 5th wave of the pandemic. The financial secretary delivered his budget online. But then we see record highs of number of confirmed cases and death cases, and then businesses were doing poorly. Now we have an unemployment rate of 5%, which is about 190,000 people unemployed. And then we see that so the relief measures are more aggressive than in previous years. In particular, there's an increase in the amount of consumption voucher to $10,000. The first installment of the voucher has been dispersed to the public. So it helps the general public in in coping with their financial pressure. So we must commend this effort. And also, the government is relaxing the requirements on the consumption voucher. So we're seeing more people on the street, more patronizing restaurants, and so on. Now, so we see that we have to act swiftly. That's the best way to deal with issues. It's the same with the government. So that's why I want the government to act swiftly on. Now, March was a tough time for Hong Kong. The healthcare workers, police officers, civil servants, and volunteers all worked in a dedicated manner for the good of Hong Kong, and they deserve our respect. And for those in the grassroots, they had to live hand to mouth. They were the hardest hit by the pandemic. And for various practitioners in different trades, they also worked very hard. And then we saw strong support from mainland and various provinces and cities. It's because they were all compatriots. They came to help us, and we were really touched. Now, we must listen. We must fully listen to the instructions of President Xi in fighting epidemic. I hope we could all learn from the 5th wave of the epidemic. The government has to be more precise and targeted in its strategy in fighting the epidemic. And then there have to be mechanisms put in place so that we will be ready to respond to the next wave of the epidemic. And of course, in the 5th wave of the epidemic, we saw that residential care homes for the elderly were the hardest hit, including the residents there. And then the budget also has proposed tax concessions, rate concession, and also for the first time there's tax rebate for rental expenses. Of course, the cap is just $100,000, but it's a good start, so it's positive. And then for the first time, the budget has proposed rental enforcement moratorium. And the bill will be considered tomorrow. Now, there's much controversy in the community about that, but certainly it would be a good try to help SMEs. And for landlords who could afford it, I hope they will help out the SME tenants. And then at the end of last year, there were the 10 financial initiatives published, and by 2022, financial services should account for 23% of our GDP. But then they only account for about 7% of the employed population. It shows that those in the trade may enjoy high salaries, but then not enough people are benefiting from the development of the financial services. That's what the financial secretary said in the budget. That shows that that's exactly why I and others in the financial sector have proposed these various new initiatives. Now, financial development is very important in the 14th five-year plan, and it's also important for Hong Kong. If we want to fully integrate into the national development, the government must bring in financial institutions, such as Asian Development Bank and so on, to set up branch offices here. We must also be fully prepared for the return of Chinese concept stocks. And have you subscribed to green bonds? Now we need to improve the securities market too, because then we could boost the number of people working in the trade, and also I would also mention another point. We have to consider the rapid changes in the global environment. For example, the Russian Ukrainian war. SWIFT has become a sanction tool. And then even football club owner had his assets frozen to the tune of $50 billion. So we still see his football team performing well. That's important too, to some. And then there are some 40 Chinese concept stocks which may be put on the delisting list. And that's caused shock waves to the financial market. So we must not overlook the possible impact on our market too. Now, I always stress that we have to have national security before we have financial security. And if we have financial security, then we have a strong international financial center. Financial services are an important pillar industry here. It accounts for 23% of our GDP, so it's an important foundation for our economic development. If the financial services sector is affected, then it will not bode well for our economic development. And of course, individuals' wealth and capital flow of businesses will be affected too, and that could lead to risks. National security actually covers various aspects of security. On the economic front, it is about sovereignty, institution, education, development, and so on. So it is important that we formulate contingency measures now. We need to enhance the security of a financial system, and then it's very important in enhancing our position as an international financial center. Now, there are many measures that should be supported in the budget, but at the same time, there's room for doing more. We still have huge fiscal reserves, so the government could do more to help the poor. Old age allowance, high old age allowance, disability allowance, and so on. Well, in the past, there were precedents of giving out 1 to 2 extra months of allowance, so the government could do more here to help those in the grassroots sector. And also, we need to develop talent and more land. Now, $100 billion have been earmarked for the development of the Northern Metropolis, and I fully support that initiative. From our experience, when we develop land, there's bound to be huge revenue. So the spending on development usually could be recovered. Now, the government could consider build, operate, transfer mode for bringing in financing for financing the Northern Metropolis, the land title tomorrow, and so on. Now, the epidemic will pass eventually, but then it exposes our problems such as an aging population, technological development, and so on. So the government must not be complacent. It has to be targeted. It has to adopt a result-oriented approach. Now, with the strong support of the country, we must work together, and we must work for Hong Kong and for the people of Hong Kong and build a bright future. So I support the Appropriation Bill 2022.
Ms. Maggie Chan. Mr. President, this is the first year I'm here as a new legislator to consider the Appropriation Bill 2022 under the improved electoral system. It's a platform for us to have a free debate. It is also the first physical meeting after the fifth wave has emerged, and it is time for us to consider putting people first and accord priorities to ensuring long-term prosperity and stability under one country, two systems. It's been 2 years since implementation of the Hong Kong National Security Law. However, there are still loopholes in the implementation mechanism. For example, in terms of financing activities that endanger national security, at the moment the current legislation does not cover such an offense. For example, we have the June 12th Humanitarian Fund. It is not registered as a society. At one point, the balance stood at $200 million. They didn't account for the incoming and outgoings of funds. Eventually, upon pressure, it was dissolved, and yet people are kept in the dark. In the beginning of this month, the government announced that a study will be conducted on crowdfunding legislation so as to put a stop to these financing activities that may endanger national security. However, in order to make sure we are putting manpower resources to combat exactly the problems we face, we need to have a clear division of work. The Financial Services and the Treasury Bureau, Financial Services Bureau and the Treasury is the bureau in charge of counter-terrorist financing. However, the policy is drawn up on the basis of the organization called FATF, that is an international organization, and on a regular basis mutual assessments would be carried out on different governments. In other words, they consider the policies and standards laid down by individual governments. But when it comes to national security, we should not follow the common protocols laid down by other governments. In terms of the standards and protocols relating to combating financing activities that may endanger national security, we should not turn to the international arena. Instead, we should rely on ourselves and our motherland. Article 10 of the Hong Kong NSL provides that the Hong Kong Police Force is responsible for collecting intelligence and investigating into offences relating to the national security. And in this regard, the FSTB and the Security Bureau should have a clear division of work. And such financing acts that endangers national security should be dealt with by the National Security Department of the Hong Kong Police Force and the Security Bureau instead. So there should be a clear division of work between the two bureaus with proper allocation of resources so as not to hamper the effectiveness of safeguarding national security. Mr. President, at the same time, I think the government should enhance and raise the level of promoting national security education. There is no top-level design for enhancing national education. Since 2020, I have been urging the government to upgrade the Steering Committee on Promoting Civic Education to Hong Kong Steering Committee on the Promotion of Basic Law Education, and I've actually put forward a motion in the National Party Congress, and that there should be more promotion on and coordination on national education. The committee should be tasked to coordinate and collate forces in Hong Kong in the promotion of constitutional and basic law education. The position of a commissioner should be established, and that an annual report should be prepared for the chief executive to make a report to the central authorities. The director of broadcasting, that is the head of RTHK, should also be one of the official members of this high-level committee. There should be funding available for the committee. And national flags should be hoisted in each and every classroom and school. We are not going to object
to the allocation of funding. But when it comes to government policies, I don't think they are properly implemented at the community level. Such as the director of broadcasting, the RTHK received funding from the government so that, according to the RTHK Charter, it can promote a sense of belonging to the country among people. And in fact, recently I received a letter from RTHK, and of course there is improvement, but I think we should go further. After all, Radio Television Hong Kong bears the words Hong Kong, so it should act more proactively and liaise with the mainland counterparts to co-produce programs so as to cultivate a sense of belonging to our country. In 2020, well, in fact, on different occasions, I said in public, and I also put forward this idea to the National Party Congress, and that contest should be held in Hong Kong, and the winner of this contest should be allowed to have appearance in the Chinese New Year variety show of the mainland. The RTHK should also think out of the box, and the government should also deploy more resources to promote the interests of women and children and the elderly. Well, I'd like to reprimand one of the organizations. Even with a reduction in salaries, I don't think they can be let off lightly. And I'm referring to the Labor and Welfare Bureau. Previously, there was a spate of scandals relating to child abuse. However, the Labor and Welfare Bureau just sat on its hands and did nothing, except to say that they are shocked. However, what is exactly the function of the Bureau? If we're talking about putting people first, there is evidence of collective abuse of children. But according to the Labor and Welfare Bureau, they have allocated the necessary resources for the policy area, and that if we want to do more, the more resources should be allocated. The other point is that the Bureau has neglected women's development. Policy relating to women's affairs is not only here for window dressing. There should be free of charge breast cancer and cervical cancer screening programs. There should be a white paper for the long-term development of women. And as far as the legal sector is concerned, I don't see any importance being attached and more resources deployed to the judiciary to promote remote hearings, e-filing of documents, so that we can have service of legal documents, arrangements with the mainland. And this is rather worrying. As for SMEs and micro-establishments, it is the country's policy goal to have common wealth for all, and that different strata of society should have a level playing field, and we should all share the wealth of success. Now, for the current and the next term of government, this is my wish. We want somebody who is proactive, who is responsible, and who can take the lead in government, so that people can feel the good deeds of the government as they see their livelihoods being improved. Finally, I thank the government for its response and the effort to refine the ESS, and I speak in support of the Appropriation Bill 2022. Ms. Doreen Kong. Mr. President, I speak in support of the Appropriation Bill 2022. The Financial Secretary used 4 headings in this year's budget, and that is fighting the virus together, enhancing economic resilience, enhancing industrial and building a livable city, and building capacity. Well, when it comes to fighting the virus, the government set up the anti-epidemic fund, and then that provided resources for various anti-epidemic purposes. Like the Financial Secretary said, comparing to the various measures put forward last year, we see an addition of $300 billion input. And among all these measures, the most popular relief measure is the consumption voucher scheme, and also subsidies for different sectors of the community being affected, as well as the temporary unemployment relief scheme. In the fifth wave of the epidemic, the AEF provides the necessary support to the hard-hit industries. Unfortunately, it's been 2 years, and the number of industries and number of people affected are really hard to gauge. The relief provided by the government is far from sufficient, and it's not precise. So the second slogan of the Financial Secretary is very important. We need to revive the economy. And the most important measures would be to have quarantine-free travel with the mainland. And before the epidemic, every year we have 55 million arrivals to Hong Kong. And then in 2020, it dropped to 3.3 million. And then in 2021, the drop was 99.8%, down to 91,000 arrivals. Not only tourism-related sectors were affected. I can say that apart from pharmacies, supermarkets, all sectors of the community, of the economy, have been hit hard. The epidemic also causes prices to be jacked up, and I've actually visited some markets, and according to the people, in the past 2 years, spending on daily living increased substantially without increase in their wages. There is now a heavier financial burden on the shoulders of our people. So in terms of relief measures put forward by the Financial Secretary, he needs to be forward-looking, and he needs to develop fintech and green finance. And apart from these, he also has to put forward measures that can really meet the people's livelihood needs. For example, for the construction industry, retail industry, there should be more support measures to bolster the development so that after the epidemic, there can be a revival of these industries to allay people's concern. On building a livable city, according to the government, several $billion will be put into develop transitional housing. The projects have commenced, but we don't know the effectiveness. After all, transitional housing relies on private parties and NGOs in terms of the operation and management. The government should make sure that the money is well spent. Transitional housing, by its name, is transitional. In order to address people's housing needs, the government should speed up public housing production and production of subsidized housing. There is a suggestion that the housing production procedures should be streamlined, or land development procedures should be streamlined. I have aspirations. I think this is the first step to resolving housing issues in Hong Kong. I hope that the new term of government can show commitment in tackling the problem at source so that the housing issue can be resolved with precision. Mr. President, we still have several 100,000 SDU households, and I once visited a family of 4 living in a 100-square-foot subdivided unit. And the day of the visit, the mother went to work, and the 3 other children just stayed on the beds doing homework, watching TV. And for those living in subdivided units, a day of waiting is a suffering for them. And about resources for the Housing Authority, the Housing Authority is an independent body. It is self-financed and is tasked to undertake public housing production when the government only provides land. if we are to resolve housing problem in the next 10 years, the government should continue to enhance the financial capability of the housing authority by replenishing the housing authority's reserve. And for aged housing estates such as Choi Hong Estate, the quality is at stake, and there is a need to redevelop old housing estates. And back then, housing estates could be bought by tenants under the tenant purchase scheme. It's a kind of home ownership, but the TPS also brings about various issues. For example, as a result, there is no redevelopment of the whole housing estate, and there are many management issues. The original intention of public housing is to provide accommodation to those who cannot afford their own homes. I think time is right for the government to review the overall impact of the TPS. Next, I'm concerned about women's rights and social welfare. On women's rights, we have 4 million women in Hong Kong, but we only have $41 million devoted to protecting women's rights. The sum is not even sufficient for a luxury home. There is little importance attached to women's rights. But women play a very important role. They take care of their families, and they also form a significant part of our workforce. However, women face a lot of pressure but are not recognized by the public, recognized by society. And we also have single mothers under a lot of pressure. My suggestion is for the government to enhance support for women, especially grassroots women. And also, I understand there is no increased provision for accommodation for the disabled. If you take a look around in the street, you will find people with disabilities. The average waiting time for them for RCHD is 10 years. Hong Kong is an advanced city, and yet this is an embarrassment. I hope the government would pay attention to the underprivileged by providing more financial support, so that with more financial resources, you can provide direct help to the grassroots and the underprivileged. After all, they are part of Hong Kong, and they should be given equal treatment. As a legal practitioner, I'm concerned about expenditure for the Department of Justice and the judiciary. In the past years, the workload for these two departments have continued to increase, together with a Greater Bay Area integration and also digitizing court proceedings. We need more resources. This year marks the 25th anniversary of Hong Kong's reunification with the motherland. It is time for us to review the effectiveness of bilingual legal system in Hong Kong to make sure we're catching up with the rest of the world. As an advanced economy, we need to have modernized legal system. So I hope sufficient resources can be given to the judiciary and the Department of Justice. Finally, I'd like to give thanks to the Financial Secretary. In the past few years, Hong Kong has gone through a lot of challenges, and Financial Secretary has managed to resolve people's issues despite having a tight financial position. Next, Mr. 郭偉強。
廣大嘅打工仔咧。